We'll start this story series with what I call appearances. Now, you know how very often what you see on the outside is not what's on the inside, and this is one of those stories. So we get a call and we got contacted by this guy called Andy, and apparently he's got a home in Kellyville here in Sydney, and it's got a leak that he desperately wants to fix. Now things can get a bit complicated when the property that we're going to go and have a look at is actually tenanted, because we need to organise through the owner or the real estate agent and also the tenant for a time to access the property, so that we can organise for an inspection of the property on the inside, have a good look on what is on the inside, translate that to the outside, and then try to come up with a reason why there's a leak. We eventually organise for a time when the tenant is available, and we front up and have a look at a leak, and specifically this is a leak in a rear bedroom on the ceiling, and there is a patch on the ceiling. So we front up and speak to the tenant, and she's packing up and she's actually moving out. So we have a look at this leak at the rear bedroom, and she says there's already someone been out to do some repairs. And so, which prompts us to ask the question, well, what did they actually do? And she said, well, there's a huge leak in the garage at the back of the house. And it's a lot worse than this particular leak. And we think the one in the garage has been repaired because someone's come and done some work. We're not quite sure about this one because it still seems to be happening. So we pop out and have a look at the leak on the garage first, which wasn't the leak that we're supposed to have a look at, and it looked like a bad leak. So contact Andy, and I said, listen mate, what's happening? He said, oh yes, I'd organised someone to do some repairs already. They found that there's a problem with the box gutter in the garage, and they've done a repair. So I said to him, well, you don't want us to have a look at this leak, it's already been fixed, right? He says, no, I'm not quite sure whether they've done the job correctly or not, so can you just have a look at that too? And this is when outward appearances don't match with what's actually happening. There were no alarm bells rung at that stage because everything seems quite normal. So I said, what about the leak at the rear bedroom? He said, oh, the guys had a look at it and they were not quite sure what was happening there. So their proposal was to put a membrane over that section of the roof on the parapet. You can see some holes on the parapet, and they think that's what's causing it. So they proposed to spend a lot of money to get that repaired. And we didn't proceed with that, so that's why we want you to have a look at it and tell us what exactly is happening. And this house in this particular complex is similar to a lot of the houses adjacent to it, obviously put up by the same builder or developer. And there's actually a couple of houses that's been repaired because there is obviously something wrong with how the house has been put together. They may look good on the outside, but if you go inside and look beneath the covers, you'll find that there's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff that doesn't quite work so well. So build quality in New South Wales or in Australia isn't quite what it appears to be. So we jump up on this roof and have a look at the area that's leaking. Roof looks good. There doesn't appear to be anything wrong with the roof. We can see that the parapet has been damaged by hail. There are marks on the polystyrene cladding that's on the parapet, but there's no way that the damage to the parapet is causing the leak to the rear bedroom. So there's no obvious reasons why this roof should be leaking at this particular location. In instances like this, what we propose to the client is we'll give you a quote, we'll pull that section of roof up, check it, have a look at what's happening, do whatever repair is required so that it doesn't leak anymore, and that is our quote. So we provide a quote. So we provide Andy with this quote, and straight away he says, when can you do the job? We don't know why there's this hurry to get the job done. Eventually we sort of figured it out, but at this stage we had no idea. So we sent a team out, they physically pulled that section of the roof off, and what we found was that it wasn't a leak as such, but it was a condensation problem. So what they had was rear bedroom, there's an ensuite, and the ensuite has a shower. You got a fan in there that draws the warm air, the warm moist air out of the shower into the ceiling cavity, but there's no specific closed vent that takes the hot air outside the roof via vent and exhausts the moist air. So it goes into the cavity, and at this location it just happened that the building blanket that was installed under the roof sheets had a lap in it. And what happened was that the hot air got in between the lap and hit the underside of the roof sheeting. You got condensation, the condensation dripped back onto the foil on the blanket, and over time the water built up and then spilled over the edge of the foil, and you got this drip on the ceiling that no one could figure out what was causing it. So we did the necessary repairs, which is basically to seal the lap on the building blanket so there was no more gap so that the hot air could get in under the roof sheeting and not cause any more condensation. Put the roof back, and we said, okay, our job's done, we'll send Andy an invoice. So the invoice was sent, and we got a call from Andy, and he said what exactly was the problem. We described to him what the problem was, and we suggested that he may put in a proper exhaust system to exhaust the shower air externally and not into the ceiling cavity, and that would be a permanent solution. He said he'd go away and think about it, and that was the last we heard of Andy. He never paid us, and to this date, and this is almost 2 years ago, no payment. We don't know who Andy is. I've never met him. None of us have physically met him. And we don't even know whether he was the owner, he was a real estate agent, he was the purchaser of the property. So we don't really know Andy at all, and we don't know who to blame. Now, when we went and did a little bit of research on this particular repair and the story behind it, we found that Andy had organized for a building inspection, which is a pre-purchase inspection on this particular property. Now, the property is in Kellyville here in Sydney, and we don't know why, but the building inspection company is based in Melbourne, in Victoria, in another state. Now, why the building report wasn't done by someone here in Sydney, and it was done by someone who had to travel all the way up to Sydney to do the building report, that's one of the unknowns of this story. So it's kind of weird. So a building report was done on a property, which meant that this property was on the market and it was going to be sold. Whether it was sold or not, we don't know. To this date, we don't know whether Andy represented the purchaser, the vendor, or just an agent in between. So there's a lesson to be learned from every story. Now, obviously, the lesson here is that we lost money on a job because we never got paid. But I think the most important lesson for us here was that we should not rely on appearances to guide us in the things that we do. This particular job seemed simple. We got a client, he had a problem, we came up with a solution, and we fixed the problem. But what was different with this particular job was that we never ever met the client. Now, if you don't meet the client, you don't get that feel about the client and where he's coming from and what the real story is. So now we know that if a mysterious client comes up who only gives you their first name and you don't actually meet them, and there are a lot of funny things happening with the actual lead, like he's had work done before just recently, and why wouldn't he get the same people to do the work on all the leaks rather than just one leak? And we should have questioned the tenant a little bit better. Maybe we would have got a better story of the situation of the property, whether it's been sold, how long, and all that sort of stuff, to see whether the client was going to be a client of our choice. Most clients are good, but every now and then, like Andy here, he's not the sort of client that we want. Technically, we did learn a lesson that condensation can cause a roof leak. Not a roof leak, but it's a problem that appears as a stain. So there were a lot of tricks to this story. We had a tricky client and we had a tricky leak. We fixed the tricky leak, but we still haven't fixed the tricky client. And we've got more stories similar to this coming.